Broadcasting from the Faith Bunker in a secret location, Sheep Below Ministries presents The Bunker Brothers.
We are Christian men, fathers, and husbands, but we are also former correctional officers. Just like everyone who has ever been in the first responder world, you know that it can change your view on everything.
A while back, we decided to dig into our Christianity, its people, theology, apologetics, and history. We try to do this with humor, honesty, and respect. Now, we want to include you in our conversation. I'm Daniel Audette.
And I'm Andrew Graham. And together we are
The Bunker Brothers. Graham, we're back with another episode of Bunker Brothers. Man, I've really been enjoying what we're doing. We have had some really good episodes here in the past. I hope folks are checking out the podcast.
And going back and listening to the ones they may have missed.
Yeah, and feel free to share them with a few friends. I'm sure we've dealt with a few that maybe you've got a friend or two that have had some questions about Christianity or about different issues. This is a great thing to say, hey, I'm listening to a podcast and I think you'd like to hear it. I think you might find something interesting in here. Answers your question. And a great witnessing tool. So tonight we have an interesting thing. Remember, we love doing things about what? The past and the present and all kinds of things, even the future, right? Concerning our faith. And we also look at the people, places, and times. And here we are with one of these people. And it is
St. Christopher.
What an interesting thing to choose.
We're re-examining the saints once again.
Re-examining the saints. Now remember, the reason why we re-examine the saints is I feel like Graham agrees that we often in Christianity, on one side, the saints are raised to a level that they probably shouldn't have been raised to. And on the other side, the more Protestant side, it's like we totally ignore these people even existing when these are men and women of God who, many of them lived excellent lives, did very excellent work, and give us a good example of how to live for Christ. So why should we throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater?
Don't do that.
Right. And ignore these godly people that can teach us something. You know, why should we do that? Look at the people who they're saints. So we should ignore them? Come on. So here we are with this fellow, St. Christopher Graham. I actually don't know a whole lot about this particular saint.
I didn't either, and the reason I put him on the list is when I was a child, one of my relatives gave me a St. Christopher medal.
Sure,
even though we're not Catholic.
Very common to get a St. Christopher medal, or people trying to sell homes to even put a St. Christopher statue on the property in the idea that it's going to sell the home. We know that's not how it works because we don't believe in witchcraft. Moving on.
But that got my mind rolling when you were talking about examining the saints.
Yeah.
And I've thrown you a couple of curveballs so far.
I think so too. I would say one of my non-curveballs was us doing St. Nicholas around Christmas time. Hey, if you haven't seen that one, it's actually pretty cool because it turns out the man was a real man of God and made a difference in his time, and it's worth looking at.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up because St. Nicholas and St. Christopher actually overlap a little bit.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Same part of the world, even same time frame, or generally the same time frame.
So they're maybe contemporaries is one way.
Well, I'm not sure they were direct contemporaries, but pretty close.
Okay.
Within a generation of each other.
So tell me about St. Christopher. What do I need to know about him?
Well, let's start out with that. It's probably 3rd century.
Uh-huh. So
we're talking about the 400s.
I gotcha.
200s.
Gotcha.
So he's a little bit earlier than St. Nicholas, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I misread that. My confusion came in. St. Nicholas was in the 300s, not the 3rd century.
I can edit most things and make it sound really intelligent. Yeah, but I'm not going to leave that in there.
He is very popular amongst both Catholics and the Orthodox in the East.
Oh, interesting.
He has very much a very big following in both of those sects.
Huh.
His feast days are the 25th of July amongst the Western Church and the 9th of March among the Eastern Church.
I like any excuse for a feast day.
Any excuse to party, right? And this is just some quick background stuff that I just find interesting because I don't know a lot of this stuff.
Right.
He is the patron saint of the cities of Baden, Brunswick, and Mecklenburg.
Wow.
As well as several other cities. and patron saint of bookbinders, gardeners, mariners, travelers, protector against toothaches.
Oh, I love that one.
I found that one very interesting. That they specifically said he's a protector against
toothaches.
Hailstorms and sudden death.
Okay, so we know that some of that's kind of, ridiculous, right? I mean, we're gonna throw it out there to me that him being the protector of toothaches or protector really anything doesn't make sense. But what's the truth about him, and why is he worth remembering, I think?
Well, let's start with the legend is the way I would phrase it. Since, we don't know a whole lot about him, to be honest.
Right.
We have some stories about him which are probably fictionalized from true events. Let's put it that way.
It happens a lot.
They're way overblown epics about somewhat true events.
Interesting.
But the main legend that I could find was he was actually born to a heathen king, either in Canaan or Arabia.
Okay.
Somewhere in that part of the world. And he was called Offerus.
Huh.
Offerus.
Well, I would change my name too.
I would too.
Yeah.
In time, he became big and strong. Nice, good legend stuff there. And resolved to serve only the strongest and the bravest.
Oh.
So at first he bound himself to a worldly king.
Huh.
But he found him lacking in courage, dreading the name of the devil.
Wow.
So he bound himself to Satan.
Oh, wow.
So he bound himself to the one that the other one was afraid of.
So Christopher actually became officially at that time then what we would describe as being a Satanist.
Possibly, yes.
Wow, that is crazy. I did not know that.
But he turned away from that because the latter was frightened by the sight of a cross on the roadside.
Oh, so he realized there was somebody bigger than Satan, and that got his attention.
That got his attention.
That is interesting. I know a story about this.
Okay.
But I'll share it when you're ready to hear it.
Go ahead.
It's a missionary story.
Go ahead.
Okay, so there was a missionary that was working in one of the areas, where they had a Hindu religion was predominant. And they had a local holy man that represented Kali. And Kali is a very deadly demon spirit in their world, and they don't even make no bones about it. This is a god who is a demon. And he had come out because the missionary that was in the area was preaching and teaching, and it was causing people to go and to come less to him. And so he would go out and he was trying to confront this missionary. He did so a couple times. So on one occasion, while he was out there confronting the missionary and really trying to curse him, to be honest, the appearance of Kali formed in front of the holy man and began to rush in all of its fierce appearance directly at the missionary, where it looked like this horrible, crazy, multi-armed, skull-holding, sword-wielding creature, which is of demonic origin, was coming to kill this missionary. And the missionary, with boldness, looked at him and began to pray and call on Jesus Christ, call on God. And Kali, this thing that was representing that, stopped right in its track. It could not come any closer once it reached the missionary. Could not lay a hand, could not attack him, could not hurt him. Well, the holy man, that represented Kali to that village was absolutely shocked. He knew of no one greater, nothing mightier than this particular demon god. When he saw something stop it in its track, and this we know was God stopping this creature, he immediately came forward and asked the missionary, I want to know your God, because there's no one stronger.
You tell stories like that, and it always reminds me of Elijah and the 400 prophets in the Old Testament. Yeah. It's got that same ring about it.
It does. Interesting. And
as we know, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord.
Yeah, it's true. Right.
According to Solomon. So he's now gotten rid of a worldly master and a spiritual master.
Huh.
He was traveling one day, and a small child approached him and asked him to help him cross a river.
Okay.
Now, I've seen it said as a river. I've seen it said as a body of water. The river makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, and back at this time, no one hardly knew how to swim.
Right.
That is the truth.
And if it was a small child and it was
Right.
a heavy river, he may not have been able to get across it even if he knew how to swim.
Right, true.
So, big, giant, strong Christopher, or who would become Christopher,
Right.
picked up the boy, put him on his shoulders, and started across the water.
Huh.
Well, apparently the tide was very strong in the river, because as he went along, he just got slam wore out.
Huh.
And he looked at the child and he said, "Child, you have put me in great peril. I feel as though I have the weight of the world on my shoulders."
Wow. Wow.
So, I mean, he's exhausted.
Yeah.
Fighting the river and carrying the child. And
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Well, the little boy talked back to him and said, "Christopher, not only do you have the weight of the world upon your shoulders, you have, let me get this right, but you have carried him that created and made all the world upon your shoulders."
So as though Christ had appeared to him in the form of a child.
Almost as a Christophany.
Wow.
Yes. The child instructed Christopher, and Christopher actually means Christ bearer, which makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
If the child is a representation of Christ.
Right.
Told him to go back across the river that he just crossed,
Right.
and plant his staff in the ground, and tell the ferryman that the staff would sprout. Well, of course, because it's Christopher, it all happened exactly the way the child said it would.
Sure.
It said by the morning, the staff had taken roots, and flowers and fruit grew from it.
Wow.
So that's pretty much where we get the story. That's pretty much the strongest story from the St. Christopher legend. And I like the staff imagery because it calls back to Aaron.
Sure.
And Moses and that kind of stuff. So I understand where that imagery comes from.
Yeah, I get that.
People have taken it to mean or denote the trials and struggles that you might take up upon coming to Christ.
Right.
So it's not just physical travel, but also spiritual travel. So, any thoughts on that?
That's interesting. Well, I mean, we do know that you can get weighted on the way, and we understand that sometimes the just traveling through the world to get things done for God can weigh us down. And Jesus actually spoke a little bit about that. Jesus said in this way, after he came to wash the disciples' feet, Peter, of course, refused. I'm not worthy of that.
Right.
After Christ got done explaining to him that, if you don't let me do this, then you have no part with me. Peter said, "Well, then wash all of me. Don't just stop at one part." And Jesus said, "You don't need to. You're already clean, but you do need to have your feet washed." And so it was an interesting thing that I look at that as sometimes, the disciples, they were clean. We're clean by Christ, but we travel through a dirty world. And we pick up a lot of muck along the way. We don't mean to. We're not necessarily trying to, but we kind of get our feet dirty in the world. You get your hands dirty, get your feet dirty. Well, just because you get your hands dirty or your feet dirty doesn't mean you stay dirty and go, "Well, my hands and feet are dirty, so I might as well be dirty all over." No, you let Christ wash off those hands and those feet. So the hands are ready to serve again, and the feet are ready to go again. So if you don't let Jesus Christ wash off the dust of this world from you, then you've got no part with him, if you want to think of it in that way. But you're clean, fully clean. But if you don't let this dust get off of you, after a while, it's just going to build up and you're going to be dirty, aren't you? You're just going to give into it.
When you start trying to do the right thing, sometimes that's when everything seems to fall apart.
I think that's true. And I've said partially from experience now, one of the mistakes people make is they'll say, "See, that's proof that, that either God doesn't care, or I'm not good enough, or what good is it for me to do this? Because look what happened. If you really choose to believe that way, when bad things happen to you and you're a believer, or you're really trying to serve God and then crummy things still happen, that means you really were thinking you were doing works.
Right.
You're really thinking that you have made God owe you somehow, and you've really must believe that your salvation was based off of you doing good works to save yourself. Because that's, if you read in the Word of God, you read in Hebrews chapter 11, that the people that God was saving were unworthy of the world they were in. And they were living sometimes in caves, being beheaded, having to hide out. I mean, it was a bad condition, and that is in Hebrews 11, because that's your hall of fame. That's your heroes of the hall of fame in there.
Right.
Your heroes of faith. Everyone talks about the first few people that are named, the different prophets, teachers, miracle workers. Oh, they'll talk about them, but they rarely go into the rest of that verse, which says these are ones that had to live in caves. They had to hide out all the time. They were, they had to.
But if you look at the stories of the prophets, they're pretty rough most of the time.
Yeah, true.
Very few of them had an easy life.
And it's a thing here that if success or good things happening is the only testament you have to the fact you have faith, you probably have the wrong concept of what faith really is. Faith is God's work in you.
Yeah, his emblems are the child, which is a representation of Christ.
Right.
The staff, and then a tree from which the staff budded.
Right.
Or,
Gotcha.
you know what I'm trying to say. Now, he did, after this incident, come to a man, I'm trying to find the guy's name, who instructed him in theology and faith and all those things that we came to be, and ultimately baptized him. The guy's name was probably Babylas, Babylas.
Okay.
And I always try to spell things when I don't know if I'm saying them correctly, because I'm probably not.
I don't know.
But he found this guy. This guy was a hermit.
Oh, yeah.
But
he was Kermit?
no, he was a hermit.
I'll teach you how to serve God.
Oh,
You were
gosh.
saying?
It's not easy being green.
He was a hermit.
Anyway, but he taught him about Christ and faith, and ultimately baptized him under the name of Christopher. It's a very typical closing to the story. There's nothing a whole lot there, but I did want to mention it. Now, the last part of what I would call the legendary part, because we don't know for sure, and when I say legendary, I don't mean to imply that it's true or not true.
Right.
I'm saying that we don't know. That a lot of it may be embellished from a real life source, or it may be the truth, or it may not be the truth. We just don't know for sure.
Right.
Is the fact that he was a martyr.
Interesting.
Now, most saints we know are martyrs.
Sure.
They're saying that it was probably under Emperor Decius in Lycia, which is where St. Nicholas came from.
Sure.
He was imprisoned, shot with arrows, burned, and beheaded around 251 AD.
Now, this was not uncommon for people to actually go the distance in killing someone.
No.
I mean, especially if they really had it out for you. He was, now listen to what was done to him again.
All right, first he was imprisoned.
Uh-huh.
He was shot with arrows.
Uh-huh.
Burned.
Right.
And beheaded.
Sure. And that makes total sense if you're back in this time period, that they would do all that to you just to get it done with.
Well, they didn't want to bury him alive.
Well, they didn't want to, do half a job, Torture was a common thing back at this time. Execution without being tortured beforehand was unusual.
Well, and we don't really consider it a whole lot. But look at all the things that they did to Jesus before he was actually hung on the cross.
That is true.
He was scourged, the thorn of crowns, the actual carrying of the cross.
Beard being ripped out.
The beard being ripped out. All of these things, it just shows the pattern in that time frame.
Right.
Because we're talking about less than 300 years after Christ.
True, right, yeah.
So, I mean, it's not that long in the span of history after the death of Christ.
Right.
So, it would still be kind of the same mindset.
That's true.
And I think it's interesting that he had a lot of torturous things up to being actually beheaded.
Right.
Just like Christ had up to being hung on a cross.
Sure.
Just an interesting thought. Excuse me.
So was St. Christopher, you say he's kind of hard to figure out, but was he really a real person?
Well, now, most people think that St. Christopher was a real person.
Huh.
They'll say they don't know how many of the stories are true. They don't know how much of the stories are true. Those kind of things. But they do think he was a real person. Actually, in the 1500s,
Yeah.
there was a Jesuit priest named Nicholas Serarius,
Huh.
Serarius,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually included Saint Christopher in one of his treatises.
Huh.
Treatises.
Yeah, a thing he wrote about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because of your new fascination,
Oh, yeah?
I thought I'd throw this out.
Yeah.
He was actually mentioned by Molinus.
Oh, Molinus.
Yeah, where the holy molies come from.
Oh, no. Yes, the holy molies.
We've been discussing Molinism
Hmm.
amongst ourselves since we talked to Mr. Tyson James
Yeah,
last
that's true.
time.
That's true.
And we've decided that we're going to mess that word up, so we're just going to call them the holy molies.
Might as well.
But yes, Molinus even mentioned him in one of his writings.
Huh.
So, you got several people, 1,000 plus years later, but they do mention him. Chaucer mentioned him in the Canterbury Tales.
Oh, wow.
Or at least that one of the travelers had a St. Christopher medal upon his breast.
Huh.
So even in something as well respected as Chaucer, it's mentioned.
Right.
So we have good reason to believe that this figure has been around a long time, so it
Sure.
probably was a real person at some point.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, that the story is not that far-fetched when you're thinking about it. It's not uncommon for God to get the attention of people through very unique means that might get them to listen to what he's trying to say to them. So him taking that form and sitting on his shoulders and concealing who he was until in the middle of this water, and then telling him, hey, there's more than just this that you've got on your shoulders. There's a lot more going on here. And I think that's kind of cool. I can get that. And his conversion to serving God out of ultimately realizing that God was the greatest being that is around, that God is actually the greatest power and being, and that it exists and that nothing compares, is another interesting thing about St. Christopher. If that would be my biggest takeaway. When I was younger, all I knew about St. Christopher was somehow he was supposed to protect people in some way. And then I knew that people who were trying to sell property would buy St. Christopher statues and bury them on properties thinking it was going to sell. And that was just so weird to me because that just doesn't make sense. A statue of something buried on a property, you can buy them now online, and you can buy St. Christopher's and you can put it in your property, and supposedly it's going to make it sell. We know that that's not something that's reality. It's just not how it is. Because it doesn't match the Word of God and what it would tell us to do. We're not going to buy a statue of something or anything and put it on our property to do that. And if it does work for somebody, then it's not working for the right reason. Let me put it like that.
Right.
And so I'm very critical of that, because what happens is it gets away from the truth of what is being taught by the person's life. And the truth of what's being taught by his life is that, sometimes you gotta realize that God is really God.
Hey everyone, my name is Daniel Audette, and I have something I need to say. I would never dream of climbing into an airplane by myself and trying to fly. And why is that? It's because I don't know how to fly an airplane. Of course, I would make a mess of it and probably crash before it even got off the ground. Something else. Has anyone ever told you that life doesn't come with an instruction manual? Of course they have, but they lied to you. Life does come with an instruction manual. but we never take the time to read it. And just like with everything else, men especially will not read the instructions. So what is this instruction manual? And what in the world has it got to do with flying an airplane? The manual is the Holy Bible, the Word of God. Men, this time we have to read the instructions, or we are definitely going to crash the plane. And it's going to hurt us and others. My advice to all the men out there is to dust off their old Bible and read the thing. Now here comes another problem. We do really good for the first few days, but after a while it becomes harder and harder to stick to it. We have family, business, recreational activities, and that just takes us away from reading God's Word. That's when it becomes important to have someone to hold you accountable. And that's why we have the Faith Bunker on Facebook and Twitter. Come join with other men who want the same thing you do. They want to be held accountable, to be prayed for, to have a sense of brotherhood. And mostly, they just want to study the Word of God. Don't get me wrong, I'm not judging anyone. I've failed in my daily readings many, many times. And that is why I'm not only a founder of Faith Bunker, but I'm also a bunker brother. We all need to help keep going with life when it gets in the way. The Bunker Brothers in the Faith Bunker want to help and want you to help them. Come on, there's nothing stopping you. We read through the Bible every year. Sometimes it's front to back reading, and sometimes it's chronological, but we're reading every page in every year. We're already going this way. All you have to do is come along. And as I once heard someone say about the Faith Bunker, hang on, because you're in for a wild ride. Again, that's the Faith Bunker on Facebook and Twitter. And I'll see you there.
Well, and you mentioned something that I hadn't even thought about, or you made me think of it. You mentioned that the child in the story waited until they were halfway across the river.
Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting that it was in a time of, struggle and despair and, not knowing if he could go on. That's when he cried out to somebody to help him.
Right.
And it's just so common that we get to that point in our life, and I'm, again, speaking from experience.
Yeah.
Where we go, all right, I've done everything I can do. I can't do any more, so somebody else has got to do it.
Right.
So, God, if you're there, show up.
And another issue why I like the story, especially about that, is it has a very Pauline-esque feel. Because Jesus appears to Paul and he says to him, Paul, why are you persecuting me? It's hard for you to kick against the pricks. It's hard for you to resist so hard. He knew that it was hard. It was causing pain. And here we have a very similar situation where a child's going, yeah, I know it's tough. I know the burden being placed on you is tough, but that's nothing.
Right.
Burdens are, you think you're going to receive, he received a greater burden in a way.
Yeah.
So remember, Peter was told one time, he said, look, you're going to be carried to places you don't want to go by people you don't want to carry you there, is my way of putting it. You're going to be taken to places you don't want to go. And he
did.
And he was like, oh. And so there was a cost. And I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer offers an insight on this in his cost of his book we wrote, Cost of Discipleship. And
if anybody would know, he would.
Well, the fact is that there's a cost, and it doesn't mean that you're paying that cost to pay for your salvation, but it means that there was a cost to Christ, and the servants are never greater than their masters.
Right.
And when your master becomes a servant, what will you become? If your master is crucified, what will you experience? Because ultimately, your death is inevitable. And also, God wants to kill you. Well, he wants your flesh to come in submission to himself. And your flesh knows that. The spirit of man knows that and resists that, because that means it's death. It means it doesn't get its will and get its way. And it looks at that as though that was death for sure.
Right.
So we have a fight because the flesh doesn't want to lose power, doesn't want to lose its strength against us, doesn't want to do what we want or what God wants because of that. And so sometimes there is a price to pay. And St. Christopher, he paid that price, didn't he, apparently?
He did.
It's interesting. Of course, I've always believed very strongly that when we're talking about someone who's a martyr, that a martyr is really not a person that dies for Christ or dies for Christianity, but a person that would want to live for Christ, to live for God so much, he is willing to give up his life to do so. Let me repeat that again to you. A person that is willing, that wants to live for God so much, he will give up his life to do so.
Well, and isn't that the way we describe Jesus?
Right.
And that's a valid point.
Huh. What else did you find about old St. Christopher?
A few things, just interesting factoids rolling around. In 1386, a brotherhood was founded under the patronage of St. Christopher in Tyrol and Vorarlberg.
Vorarlberg, yes.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
Maybe?
Yes.
Which I had to look up.
Uh-huh.
Those are two cities in the Austrian Alps.
Oh, okay.
So we're back in the Germany, Austria, that part of the world.
Gotcha.
Actually, North Italy, Western Austria.
So what was the purpose of this group?
They were there to guide and protect travelers over the Jarlberg.
Wow.
So very Knights Templar-esque.
Yeah, sure.
A little bit after their time.
They protected the travelers.
But they were, and it also explains why we think of St. Christopher as
protector of travelers.
Protector of travelers.
I getcha.
I don't know that's when it started, but at least it fits in with that.
Huh.
So just something interesting. In the 1500s, a St. Christopher Temperance Society existed in Carthenia, Styria, and in Saxony and at Munich. So you're still in the Germanic part of the world. I find it interesting that a lot of this was in the Central Europe, not really where he was supposed to have been from. Just something I find interesting. I don't really have a point there other than it's just interesting to me.
Well, it got picked up on by that area, I guess. It's interesting. I don't think it's history's from there, but seems like he became popular with that culture.
And on into Italy, apparently. Veneration was shown to the saint in Venice, along the shores of the Danube and the Rhine and other rivers where floods or ice jams cause frequent damage.
Okay, so there he's going to protect against damage from the ice flows and
traveling on those rivers, because
Gotcha.
the Danube and the Rhine especially were big travel rivers.
Interesting.
Before you had major superhighways, you had rivers.
Well, I wonder if there's any pictures of them, just like we have pictures of Santa Claus. For instance, on the offshoot, we have Saint Nicholas, which is ironic that there are actually pictures of Saint Nicholas. Now, let me explain. The skull of Saint Nicholas is actually, and for real, the actual skull is still retained by the church. And so Saint Nicholas's skull has been looked at, and artists have been able to make rendering drawings of what he would look at by looking at the skull and the features on there. And so they actually have some fairly accurate drawings of Saint Nicholas today, or pictures depicting artist depictions of what St. Nicholas would have looked like back in his time. And I got to tell you, he did not look like what Coca-Cola put out with a red suit and red outfit.
No, not even close.
And
they did both have a beard.
Yeah, but it was quite different. In fact, it's quite what I expected to see. A man of that time, a little bit aged, a little sparse beard going on, and kind of round-headed. It was kind of fitting for that, but it was certainly more believable. And there is a depiction, what's really interesting, there is a stained glass depiction of St. Nicholas, and it looks ironically much, much like the artist's rendering of the skull and how it would have looked.
Wow.
So
That's cool.
someone remembered what he looked like and actually
Apparently.
had managed to capture it for that use. I want to say, didn't you know there was a picture of, St. Christopher that was pretty old.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because there's rumor, or again legend in the technical sense, that the oldest picture of St. Christopher was in a monastery on the side of Mount Sinai.
Okay.
That was erected, I believe, in the time of Justinian.
Huh.
So that would be 500s or so.
Yeah.
That's the oldest picture that we know of, or drawing, or painting, or I think it's actually a painting.
Well, here's the thing.
But
because it was in that period from the time of Justinian's, this place being made, there is a chance that it might actually depict the actual fellow. Because that
you're
was
not
made
far removed from him.
Yeah, that building was put up like mid to late 500 something.
Mid. Let me see if I can find an actual date on it.
Yeah.
527 to 565 was the time of Justinian. So
and Christopher was around during what time? You said
250s.
So it's not impossible. It's not impossible.
Well, and that's the earliest one we know about. That doesn't mean that's the earliest one of him. Period.
Sure.
There could have been paintings or drawings from his own time.
Right. It's interesting. Maybe you got an idea of what he looked like from that picture. But he looks kind of knobby and gnarly. He's got muscles, and he looks like he's ready to step out of the scene. He looks like a regular Gandalf-like character, almost like a shepherd coming out of the wall there, and it's kind of a cool depiction of him.
It is.
But it's not a wimpy depiction. It's a very man's man depiction of this guy.
Well, and
it's interesting because a lot of times people depict some of these saints as being very, very trim, slim, wimpy, wispy. This picture is not that.
Almost emaciated.
Yeah.
Looking.
This guy, this picture of him is definitely not that.
This picture is actually from Germany. And I will save it so that we can use it in our slideshow. But it's an interesting depiction of him. It's a very large depiction of him.
Yeah.
It's actually dated from the 1400s.
Oh, okay.
But it may have been based on the one from the other monastery. We don't know.
Sure, go down.
But
you know what?
You're right. It's a very strong representation of him.
Yeah.
It shows the river somewhat. It shows the staff he had, and at the top of the staff it's already budding, even though that's a little bit ahead of time.
Right.
It's got the child on his shoulders holding a cross. It's a really cool fresco on the side of this cathedral. And like I said, it goes all the way up into the vaults of the ceiling.
Right.
So I'm guessing it's probably 15, 20 feet tall.
It looks pretty big.
This thing is huge.
So what is the takeaway for St. Christopher? We're not into venerating saints, but what is the good life of him really? What does this really teach us?
Well, I think one of the things that I've taken away from this quick study, and it really has been a quick study.
Right.
We don't dive into real deep detail on these things.
Sure.
But there's no reason to think that somebody who serves God has to be a wimp. We've got characters from the Bible. I would even go back to Abraham.
Right.
Because Abraham was no wimp. Yes, there were times that he did foolish things, and there were times that he got scared. But there was also the time that he went and fought a battle to save Lot.
That's true.
You don't have to be a wimp just to be a servant of God. Just because you bow the knee to God or to Jesus Christ,
right,
doesn't mean that you're, just, what's the word I'm looking for here? Other than wimp. I feel like I've said wimp 100 times. And we pointed out the crossing story.
Sure.
And that, he got to his lowest point and he finally said, I've got to have something. And that's part of it. And the other part is Christ showed up and said, all right, I'm here to help you. Now go out and serve me.
Right, exactly.
The whole thing about the staff and going back across the river, he didn't say now life's going to be easy. He said you got to work for it.
Right.
You're going to have to work before you can show people what I'm telling you to show them. Interesting point there. And then, of course, you've got the miraculous stuff.
Sure.
You've got the staff budding, which is obviously a callback to Aaron's staff.
Of course.
And And this all before he really knew anything other than that's what he'd been told to do.
Wow.
He went out and did, miraculous things before he even would have called himself a Christian.
That's amazing.
So even before you know what you're doing, sometimes God can use you.
This is true.
And we talked about it. I talked to your mother about it this week a little bit. But when we started this, I go back to it a lot, and I know I've said it on other shows.
Right.
But when we started this, I called you one day out of the blue and said, "Hey, let's read the Bible together."
That's right.
That's all I said. I
Right.
didn't say let's start a Facebook group or let's start a YouTube podcast or let's do any of the other things that we've done since then.
Right.
Go be at movies and go hang out with really cool guys and shoot guns. And
That too.
I didn't say let's go do all that. I said, hey, let's read the Bible together.
Right.
Not because you needed it, but because I needed it.
That's right. That's right. True.
And all of a sudden, I'm cast into a role that I was not prepared for.
That's true. Good
and
point.
I still don't feel like I'm prepared for it.
Right.
And I think it's just a illustration of how life can be. Even before you decide to serve Christ.
Yeah.
Sometimes Christ puts you in that place, and you just go, okay, well, I guess this is where I'm at now.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
That's what I'm taking away from it.
Yep. That's a good takeaway. And, I think from the story of St. Christopher and what happened here, with looking at the real man from the story, you have a fellow who didn't know where to put his allegiance. He was looking for something greater than himself. There are things greater than you out there. You can serve the wrong great thing.
Yep.
There's a lot out there that's greater than a human being. There are a lot of things that are greater than you. You can serve those great things, and you will be serving something greater than you. But those things are not as great compared to God as the creator of the world. Now, here's the thing. You can serve something great. And I've seen people who will actually have served Satan, and they'll say, oh, well, I would rather party, I'd rather party in hell. You're not going to be partying there. I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. You're not going to rule in hell. That's not how it's going to work if you think that's how it's going to work. What was said about Christopher, I didn't know that he had vowed himself to Satan in that way. And I think it's interesting, and I'm going to say this very carefully. People who are hearing me who are pagan and who are Satanists, if there's anyone hearing me say this, make this very clear. If you're serving Satan, I want you to know your Lord and Master hates you. He doesn't love you. One of the worst people to ever serve is Satan. He doesn't even love the people who do serve him.
No.
He hates them,
and
he resents them, and he cannot stand them. He only will let them serve him because he knows it will damn them along with him, and he finds it amusing. And I'm going to tell you
get something out of him.
This is the biggest difference between God and the love of Jesus Christ that he has. The love that Jesus Christ showed is so different. He loves those that serve him. Not only does God love those that serve him, but he adopts them and makes them his children and loves them as his own children. And that is something that Satan never will do.
Well, I think about, you said that, and I of course, I totally agree with you. But it made me think about that quote that you read when we were doing the C.S. Lewis episode. And I'm not going to try to quote it because it was a long quote.
Yeah.
But it was from the Screwtape Letters.
Oh, yeah.
And I think for a human, and C.S. Lewis would tell you he's just a human like everybody else. But I think he gave us as good a representation of that thought pattern as anybody who's ever tried to do it.
Interesting.
That entire book is that thought pattern carried to an extreme.
Right.
He basically puts himself, if you're not familiar with the book, C.S. Lewis puts himself in the place of a younger demon and an older demon kind of in a mentoring relationship.
Right.
If you want to call it a mentoring relationship, because there's times that Screwtape is not very nice to Wormwood.
Very true.
Even in that microcosm of that relationship, you see the master being overbearing, you see the master being insulting and, degrading, and, there's no love there, there's no kindness there.
Right.
There's nothing there that's, even friendly, and they say that they're related. He calls him Uncle Screwtape. So I find that interesting. That's kind of what my mind went to when you said that.
Yeah, and Christopher realizes that God is greater. And then he comes to realize a personal relationship with that creator. It's so different. Hey, can I put one in? I want to do one of the saints. Ready? Not right now.
Okay.
But the next one, I'm going to call this.
Okay.
Did you know, drum roll
Let me
please.
pull up my list so I can add it to it.
Drum roll please. Drum roll, that's my drum roll. That I am related to St. Arnulf of Metz. Arnulf of Metz is in my family tree, and we're going to have to go and do him sometime. There is a really cool story behind Arnulf.
Well, let's not give it away.
Metz.
We want to save it for the show.
Okay.
You can tease it, but you can't give it all away at the beginning.
Fine. Listen, so that's going to be the next one we do, and let's see what we can take away from that. And hey, you've been listening to the Bunker Brothers here. We've got a great time looking back at what makes up our faith. And, we're without being critical of people who enjoy these different things and maybe experiencing their religious perspective slightly different than we are experiencing it. We're not judging you, but we do feel like, guys, we don't want to throw away these great stories of these interesting people that served the Lord before us, because they give us a good example. And we need good examples in this day and age. So we need to find the truth about the individuals, and if there's anything revealing truth is true, anything that is of a good report, we should be thinking on these things. Isn't that right,
quoting
Graham?
the Bible?
Sometimes I do quote it to you, right, Graham? Sometimes. I have had a great time. Thanks so much for leading that. It is good, man. You did good, man. You got you fact checked this stuff for me tonight. I was a little bit off on this one. You did good, though. Hey,
It's been a lot of fun.
check it out. We are going to be back again, and I promise you, we're going to be duking it out. We've got some fantastic episodes coming up, along with our Bible challenge, where we're going to be doing some mano-a-mano, one-on-one challenges.
And you're going to lose some more.
Cage matches.
And you're going to lose some more.
Of biblical proportions, I should say. And I look forward to taking you down and wiping the floor with your unbiblicalness. No, I'm just teasing. You're not unbiblical. I'm just saying. But anyway, Graham, should I say bye now?
You should say bye.
I should say bye now. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
And gals.